They tried to ban me from using solar energy and fined me for having rooftop panels, but I found a loophole in the law, proved their actions were illegal, and destroyed the HOA. Alex had been planning to install solar panels for a long time. He was tired of ever-increasing electricity bills, especially in the summer when air conditioners ran at full blast. Investing in renewable energy seemed logical. It wasn't just about saving money, but also contributing to the future. After months of researching technology, consulting experts, and comparing contractors, he finally chose a company that offered a reasonable price and quality equipment. The installation took only a few days. Workers carefully placed the panels on the roof to maximize efficiency. Alex watched with pride as the system began generating energy, making his home less dependent on the power grid. Everything was going smoothly. He even received a small rebate from the local utility company for switching to solar energy. A few days passed, and he was already seeing results. His electricity bill had dropped significantly. But when he got home from work and checked his mailbox, he found an envelope with the HOA logo among the usual bills and junk mail. That was strange. Usually, such letters contained meeting announcements or reminders about dues. When he opened it, his breath caught. It was a violation notice. The letter stated that his solar panel installation did not comply with the community's architectural standards. He was ordered to remove them immediately or face a $5,000 fine and additional penalties. The HOA claimed the panels ruined the neighborhood's visual harmony and violated the aesthetic uniformity of residential homes. Alex read the letter over and over, unable to believe his eyes. He had checked all the documents before installation, obtained the necessary permits from the city, and now they were telling him he had violated some non-existent rules. He grabbed his phone and called the HOA office immediately. They didn't answer right away. He was on hold for about 10 minutes before finally hearing the polite yet cold voice of a woman who introduced herself as the HOA manager. She spoke in a measured tone, as if she had rehearsed her response. The HOA had decided his panels did not fit the overall style of the neighborhood, so he had to remove them. He tried to explain that there was nothing in the HOA's bylaws prohibiting solar panels, but the manager curtly replied that the board had made its decision and it was not up for discussion. Alex couldn't believe what he was hearing. They weren't even trying to cite official regulations, just saying, "These are the new standards." "So what am I supposed to do?" he asked. "You have 14 days to remove them. Otherwise, the fine will increase, and the HOA will be forced to take further action," she replied evenly. Hanging up, he felt anger boiling inside him. They weren't just trying to force him to remove the panels. They were fining him for legally installing equipment that saved money and harmed no one. Moreover, he hadn't heard any complaints from neighbors. No one had come to him with concerns or expressed dissatisfaction. In fact, there were houses just a few blocks away with solar panels, and no one was bothering them. Something about this felt off. Why had the HOA suddenly targeted him? Determined to get to the bottom of it, he started investigating. First, he checked out other houses in the neighborhood. At the far end of the street, he spotted another home with solar panels installed months ago. The owner, an elderly man named Henry, had lived in the community for years and was known for strictly following HOA rules. Alex approached him and asked if he had any trouble installing them. Henry hesitated. "No, they didn't say anything to me," he replied, but his eyes showed concern. Alex sensed something was wrong. Why was the HOA going after him when other homes already had panels? Digging deeper, he looked into the HOA board members. It didn't take long to discover that the HOA president, a woman named Caroline Spencer, had close ties to the energy company that supplied power to their neighborhood. Now it all made sense. The HOA wasn't banning solar panels because of aesthetics. It was because someone had a financial interest in stopping them. They assumed he, like many others, would simply comply, pay the fine, and take down the panels. But they were wrong. Alex wasn't just going to fight for his right to use solar energy. He was going to bring down their entire scheme. Alex knew the HOA wouldn't stop with just one fine. If they were already trying to force him to remove the panels, they surely had other ways to pressure him. He decided not to take any action until he fully understood the situation. But the HOA moved faster. The next day, he found another notice in his mailbox. The fine had now increased to $7,500 because he had failed to take the necessary steps to resolve the violation within the required time frame. Alex clenched his fists. They hadn't even given him the promised 14 days. They were just piling on the pressure, and that was just the beginning. A day later, he noticed 2 HOA employees standing across the street from his house holding tablets. They were taking notes and photographing his roof. When he approached them, they quickly walked away without saying a word. That evening, he checked his mailbox again. Another notice. This time, it warned of an additional fine for violating the architectural integrity of the community and threatened legal action if he didn't comply with HOA demands. Alex was beginning to see that this wasn't just about an administrative rule. It was intimidation. They were counting on him to back down under pressure, just like many others had. But the worst part was that the HOA had started turning his neighbors against him. A few days later, his neighbor John, one of the few people he talked to regularly, came up to him looking concerned. "Alex, listen. The HOA sent letters to all the residents saying you're breaking the neighborhood rules. They're implying that if you don't remove the panels, we could all face consequences." Alex couldn't believe what he was hearing. The HOA was trying to turn the community against him. They wanted to make him an outcast, the guy who was supposedly hurting the entire neighborhood. He asked John to show him the letter. In it, the HOA claimed that unauthorized changes to home exteriors could negatively impact property values in the area. It was a thinly veiled threat. If Alex kept resisting, home prices could drop, and that would hurt everyone financially. But the most interesting part was at the bottom of the letter. It urged residents to avoid supporting violators and to protect the neighborhood's standards. The HOA was actively pressuring neighbors to turn against him. Alex realized this was no longer just about solar panels. The HOA was trying to control people through fear. But he wasn't going to be their next victim. That night, he sat down at his computer and began researching state laws on solar energy. If the HOA was banning solar panels, there had to be official regulations protecting homeowners. After hours of digging through legal documents, he found the key information. His state had a law that explicitly prohibited HOAs from restricting solar panel installations. This was the ace up his sleeve. Now he didn't just have the means to fight back. He had the power to dismantle their entire illegal policy. But he knew the HOA wouldn't give up easily. They had already launched a full-scale attack. The only question was, how far were they willing to go to break him? Alex spent the entire night at his computer, digging through state laws regulating the use of solar panels. The more he read, the clearer it became. HOA wasn't just acting illegally. They were deliberately hiding homeowners' rights from them. His state had passed a law explicitly prohibiting homeowners' associations from banning the installation of solar panels. HOAs could regulate technical aspects like safety and placement, but they had no legal authority to demand removal or issue fines for their use. That was all he needed. He downloaded the full text of the law, printed it out, and started preparing his counterattack. He knew the HOA would try to worm their way out of it, so he needed undeniable proof of their wrongdoing. The next day, he went to the city archives to check if the HOA had officially amended its bylaws. If they had truly banned solar panels, there had to be a record of it. But when he requested a copy of the latest HOA rules, he uncovered another lie. Nowhere in the official documents was there any mention of a solar panel ban. They had literally made up a rule without ever legally implementing it. This meant they weren't just violating state law, they were overstepping their own authority. Now, he had everything he needed. The official state law protecting his right to use solar energy. Documents proving the HOA had never formally added a solar panel ban to its bylaws. A history of fines showing that the HOA systematically pressured homeowners into removing their panels. But he knew legal proof alone wasn't enough. The HOA thrived on intimidation, relying on people's fear of bureaucracy and lawsuits. So he decided to take this fight public. His first move was contacting a journalist from a local newspaper who specialized in real estate investigations. He handed her copies of all the documents, including the state law proving the HOA was acting illegally. The journalist was stunned. "They're trying to force you to remove the panels, even though that's completely against the law?" "Exactly," Alex nodded. "And I'm not the only one they've done this to." She promised to publish an article within the week. But Alex wasn't stopping there. He also gathered the neighbors whom the HOA had tried to turn against him and handed them copies of the state law. "They've been lying to you. They claim solar panels ruin the neighborhood's appearance, but they have no legal right to enforce that." The residents began to realize that the HOA had been manipulating them. Many of them had already dealt with absurd fines and demands from the association, but now they had solid proof that the HOA board was breaking the law. A few days later, the article hit the local newspaper. "HOA fines homeowners for solar panels, violating state law." It detailed how the HOA had been pressuring residents to remove their panels through threats, fines, and misinformation. Alex knew the HOA was now in serious trouble, but he was ready to push even further. The next day, he filed a lawsuit against the HOA, demanding the cancellation of all fines, compensation for emotional distress, and an official ruling declaring their policies invalid. Now they couldn't just ignore him. The HOA had ruled the neighborhood through intimidation and bureaucratic loopholes, but now he was using bureaucracy against them, and he was ready to deliver the final blow. Alex knew the HOA was cornered now. After the newspaper article exposed their illegal fines and manipulations, the situation had caught the attention of not just the residents, but also local authorities. A full-blown scandal was unfolding, and the HOA could no longer just brush him off. On the day of the court hearing, the courtroom was packed. Along with the HOA representatives, journalists, several supportive residents, and Alex's attorney, Lisa Harper, a specialist in homeowners association cases, were present. She had meticulously prepared, gathering all the evidence, including a copy of the state law prohibiting HOAs from restricting solar panel installations. When the judge called the hearing to order, the HOA's lawyer tried to argue that the board was acting in the community's best interest. He claimed solar panels disrupted the neighborhood's harmonious aesthetic, and that the HOA had the right to establish rules ensuring a uniform look for all homes. But Lisa struck first. She placed an official copy of the state law on the table and calmly stated, "Your Honor, under Section 234.7 of the Renewable Energy Act, homeowners associations are explicitly prohibited from banning residents from installing solar panels. They may regulate technical parameters, but they have no legal authority to demand removal or issue fines." The judge picked up the document and reviewed it carefully. "Is this accurate?" he asked the HOA's lawyer. The attorney hesitated. We were following the community's internal standards rather than state laws." Lisa smirked and continued. "Furthermore, we requested the most recent amendments to the HOA bylaws. According to their own documents, no changes regarding solar panels were ever officially voted on by the residents." She handed the judge a copy of the HOA's bylaws to back up her claim. This means they not only violated state law, but also overstepped their own authority. They fabricated rules on the spot and then used them to threaten my client with fines. The judge set the papers down and looked directly at the HOA representative. Did you attempt to ban solar panels without holding an official vote among homeowners? The HOA's lawyer stammered something about preserving architectural consistency, but the judge had already made his decision. These fines are unlawful. The HOA has no authority to demand the removal of solar panels or impose financial penalties on homeowners for installing them. Furthermore, the HOA's actions may constitute a violation of consumer protection laws. A murmur spread through the courtroom. The HOA had lost, but Alex knew it wasn't over yet. After the ruling, he reached out to the journalist who had published the initial article and gave her an update on the court's decision. The next day, another article appeared in the newspaper. Court declares HOA solar panel fines illegal. Now the entire neighborhood knew the truth. The HOA hadn't just tried to enforce illegitimate rules, they had outright broken the law. But Alex wasn't finished. The next day, he gathered the homeowners and proposed a vote to dissolve the current HOA board. People who had once been too afraid to stand up against the HOA now saw that the board had lost all credibility. The vote was swift. An overwhelming majority of residents voted to remove the entire HOA leadership. It was the end of an era of fear and manipulation. But one question still remained. What about those who had spent years paying illegal fines? Alex wasn't going to stop until every homeowner got their money back. And now, he had everything he needed to make that happen. The court ruling was a crushing blow to the HOA, but Alex knew it wasn't enough. For years, they had fined residents using fear, intimidation, and fabricated rules. Simply proving their demands were illegal was just the first step. He wanted full accountability for those who had abused their power on the HOA board for personal gain. After the court hearing, Alex and his attorney, Lisa Harper, filed an official request with the City Council for a full financial audit of the HOA's records from the past 5 years. If the HOA had lied about solar panels, there was no doubt they were hiding even bigger schemes. For weeks, an investigation unfolded, and soon it became clear that the HOA had been concealing far more serious violations. Thousands of dollars in resident fines had no transparent record of where the money went. Several contractors performing recommended work for homeowners were directly connected to HOA board members. HOA President Caroline Spencer had been receiving commissions from the local energy company in exchange for opposing solar panels. It was pure fraud. Once these revelations became public, chaos erupted. Residents who had once been too afraid to challenge the HOA now demanded their money back. People who had been forced to pay for mandatory home improvements or architectural violations started demanding full refunds. Some even threatened to file a class action lawsuit against the board members. Under this immense pressure, the HOA collapsed. At the next general meeting, the residents officially voted to dissolve the entire HOA board. Within a week, every board member resigned. But it still wasn't over. Local authorities announced the launch of a criminal investigation into fraud and the illegal misuse of homeowner funds. Former HOA President Caroline Spencer was now under investigation, and her financial dealings were being closely scrutinized. The entire neighborhood watched as the very people who had ruled through fear for years suddenly found themselves at the center of a legal scandal. A few months later, a newly appointed temporary HOA board revised the bylaws, officially removing all restrictions on solar panels. Standing in front of his home, Alex looked up at the panels that had started it all, now a symbol of victory over HOA tyranny. They had tried to intimidate him. They thought they could force him to comply, but in the end, they lost everything. And he hadn't just kept his panels. He had dismantled their entire system of manipulation and corruption.